Hey everyone, I noticed that 99.7% of my views come from non-subscribers. If you're enjoying the horror stories on Mystic Spooky, please hit that subscribe button to support the channel. It only takes a second, and it helps me keep creating more spooky content. Sarah was a 27-year-old graphic designer who had just landed her dream job in the city. But with the job came the downside of city rent, too expensive for her to afford alone. So, after searching for roommates through friends and coworkers, she turned to Craigslist. Among the many responses, one woman, Jessica, seemed perfect. She was polite in her emails, came across well-mannered, and claimed she was eager to move into a place quickly. The meeting was simple, almost too easy. Jessica was quiet, said all the right things, and agreed to move in with just a few bags the following weekend. The first few days were normal. Jessica kept to herself, rarely spoke, and seemed like the ideal roommate. But it didn't take long for Sarah to notice odd things happening around the apartment. One evening, after coming home late from work, Sarah found her bedroom door slightly ajar, though she was sure she'd locked it. Inside, her things had been moved around. At first, she thought she must have left the door unlocked and brushed it off. But the next night, the same thing happened. Only this time, some of her personal items were missing. Her perfume bottle, a sweater, and even her journal disappeared without a trace. Confronting Jessica wasn't easy. Sarah tried to ask if she had seen her missing things, but Jessica only smiled and said, "I don't know what you're talking about." That smile, it was unsettling, like she enjoyed Sarah's discomfort. Days turned into weeks, and Jessica became more and more strange. Sarah would often hear her having full conversations in her room late at night, but when she pressed her ear to the wall, she realized there was no one else there. It was Jessica talking to herself in whispers, saying Sarah's name over and over again. Then came the journal. Sarah had been cleaning up one afternoon when she found Jessica's journal tucked under the couch cushions. Curious, she opened it, expecting to see random notes or doodles. But what she saw chilled her to the bone. Inside, Jessica had written detailed entries about Sarah, her daily routine, what she ate, when she left the house, who she talked to on the phone. Each entry was more disturbing than the last, as if Jessica had been watching her every move. Sarah's heart raced as she flipped through the pages, realizing that her life had been tracked like she was prey. The final entry sent a wave of terror through her body. "Tonight's the night. She won't see it coming." That night, Sarah bolted her bedroom door, her heart pounding in her chest. She barely slept, terrified of what Jessica might do. Around 3 a.m., she heard soft footsteps approaching her room. The doorknob rattled as if someone were testing to see if it was locked. Sarah held her breath, praying that the lock would hold. A shadow lingered under the door for what felt like an eternity before the footsteps finally retreated. The next morning, Sarah didn't waste a second. She packed her bags and left the apartment, never looking back. She didn't care about the lease or her belongings. She just needed to escape. Later, she found out that Jessica had been involved in similar incidents before, targeting roommates and driving them to leave so she could take over their lives. Jason was a broke college student trying to make ends meet. To make some extra cash, he decided to sell some old furniture on Craigslist before his upcoming move. Among the items was a well-used but still functional couch. The ad went up, and within a few hours, a buyer reached out, someone named Steve, who seemed genuinely interested. Steve offered to come by the next day to pick it up, and everything seemed normal at first. When Steve arrived, things started to feel a little off. He was polite but overly curious, asking Jason about his life, his schedule, and even who lived with him. His eyes scanned Jason's apartment like he was taking mental notes. Jason felt uneasy but brushed it off. After all, maybe the guy was just awkward. Steve handed Jason the cash, and they loaded the couch into his truck. As he was about to leave, Steve suddenly stopped, looked back at Jason, and said, "You sure you didn't leave anything inside? Maybe I should come back later, just to check." Jason assured him that everything was fine and sent him on his way. The next day, Jason received a call from Steve, claiming he had left something behind and needed to come back to retrieve it. Although Jason was hesitant, he agreed, thinking it was just a harmless mix-up. Steve arrived within half an hour, but this time, he brought a friend. Immediately, the atmosphere shifted. The two men entered the apartment without hesitation, no longer acting like polite buyers. Instead, they wandered around, making comments about Jason's things and muttering to each other. Jason's gut screamed at him that something was wrong. "Nice place you got here," Steve's friend said with a smirk. "Wouldn't take much to break in, you know?" Jason froze. The casual tone, combined with the threatening words, sent a surge of panic through him. He tried to laugh it off, but his mind raced. What did these guys want? As they lingered, Jason's anxiety grew. He excused himself to the bathroom, grabbed his phone, and frantically texted his best friend, begging for help. Minutes felt like hours as the men continued to loiter, looking over his things, their casual comments growing more sinister. Just as Jason was about to lose hope, the sound of distant sirens pierced the air. The two men exchanged a quick glance before abruptly leaving, their unsettling smiles disappearing. Jason's friend had called the police, thinking something was wrong, and it was. Jason later realized how close he had come to being robbed. Or worse, Steve never contacted him again, and Jason never sold anything through Craigslist after that. Mark had fallen on hard times. He'd been out of work for months, rent was overdue, and bills kept piling up. Desperation led him to Craigslist, where he found a job ad that seemed too good to be true. Warehouse work, flexible hours, and a high hourly rate. The ad didn't give many details, but Mark wasn't in a position to be picky. He applied immediately and got a response within an hour. The man who replied, Rick, said they were in need of workers right away. Rick asked Mark to come to the warehouse on the outskirts of town the next evening. The pay was generous, and Mark was hopeful this could be his way out of trouble. When he arrived, his stomach churned with unease. The warehouse was in a remote, run-down industrial area. The building looked old, abandoned even. There were no signs of activity. No trucks, no workers, just Rick standing at the entrance with an unsettling smile. Mark hesitated, but Rick waved him inside. As they walked through the dimly lit building, the atmosphere grew colder. The warehouse felt empty and forgotten, with dusty shelves and nothing to suggest any real work was happening. Mark's nerves began to tingle, but Rick assured him it was just a slow day. They reached the back of the building, where Rick showed Mark to a small office and told him to wait while he got things ready. The office was claustrophobic, with flickering lights and a cold draft creeping in from somewhere. Minutes passed, and Mark grew more anxious. There was no sign of other workers, and the silence weighed heavily on him. Then, Mark heard something faint. Voices, muffled but clear enough to make out. One man asked, "Is he ready yet?" Another replied, "Almost. Just a few more minutes." Mark's heart sank. Were they talking about him? His skin crawled as he stood, trying to think clearly. Something was very wrong. He looked around the room, and his eyes landed on a small window near the ceiling. Without a second thought, he pushed the chair to the wall, climbed up, and pried the window open. Just as he started to squeeze through, footsteps echoed down the hall. Fast, heavy footsteps, coming straight toward him. Mark's pulse raced as he scrambled through the window, landing hard on the ground outside. He didn't wait to see who was coming. He ran. The voices behind him grew louder, but he didn't stop. He sprinted through the darkness until he reached the main road. Mark never went back to that warehouse. Later, He found out the job was part of a human trafficking operation. He'd barely escaped, and the thought of what could have happened haunted him for years.